So what happens when your friends say, no, you can't have a piece of that. I don't want to damage my plant. You can say, I know what I'm doing. It's mine. We'll teach you the skills to do all these different divisions on these different orchids so they no longer have an excuse to say no. And welcome to the Nature Company. If this is the kind of information you're interested in, please hit that subscribe button down below if you haven't already, and that notification bell to be notified of all our upcoming videos so you don't miss out on a thing. So while we're still outside in the sun here, let's have a look at these types of orchids, your vandas and things like that. They grow up basically on a single stem, and they may produce a few little branches but not particularly many, and their growing point is mainly from the very top, and they just generally keep growing upwards. These are called monopodial orchids, and these you're going to be treating slightly different to the other types that seem to put out a whole little mat of different branches all on the surface and tend to grow horizontally as opposed to vertically. So let's take a closer look in at these monopodial orchids. So looking at these monopodial orchids, you can see why they may be slightly more difficult to take divisions from, because you just have one long stem and nothing really seemingly to work from. But there are ways of doing it. For one, if you're wanting to take a top cutting off a long orchid, then be sure you have at least 2 or 3 roots to be able to take really easy, successful top cutting from. This will ensure maximum viability of the plant, as it will have enough root volume to help feed the leaves while it continues to grow, and then it will be able to produce more roots. Also, they can produce these offshoots at the base, and then these are also relatively easy to remove right at the base. They can be cut off as long as you also, again, having at least 2 or 3 roots to support the top growth. If you don't have this root volume, you are going to have to be looking after them very carefully, preferably in a humidity chamber of sorts to allow for root growth to happen. Also, at a point like this, if you wanted to, you could always remove your tall top piece off to leave a much more branched appearance of your plant. But again, going through and checking to the point where it would have 3 or more roots coming off of it. So the one thing about doing these top cuttings is by removing your apical meristem, it helps force these lateral buds to then sprout. So often by doing that top cutting, you're going to land up with a bushier plant. So this generally applies to most of these sympodial orchids, whether they vandas, mocaras, renantheras. Most of them will react in almost exactly the same way. So there again, if we are taking a top cutting, invariably we would never take a top cutting when there's a bud incoming. We'd look for 1, 2, 3 roots and then do the top cutting. But here we see we've got other side shoots coming off, so I would prefer to wait till these are big enough. This one here already has 2 large roots coming off of it, and then that would be ideal to remove if I weren't looking to keep a large mother plant. But also by removing the side shoot like that, it could help force out other lateral buds. It's always a toss of the coin as to what you want your plant to do. So now that you've mastered the art of the monopodial orchids, let's get to those sympodials. Now this is just a small selection of the sympodial orchids. Your cattleyas, your dendrobiums, your oncidiums, the maxillarias. What someone said to me is very possibly one of the small encyclias. So let's have a look at them and see how we should treat these when we're doing the divisions. For things like the maxillaria, because they land up growing on these long extended rhizomes that rise up out of the ground so that they can form these large rounded masses of plant. It's really easy to see where to cut them because we want to cut along the rhizome, leaving 3 to 5 pseudobulbs. I always like to get as large a pseudobulb volume as possible when taking divisions of these maxillarias, as they're relatively small pseudobulbs and often they don't have many roots as they go up. And we want this to be strong enough to be able to survive the repot, replant, or mounting. So in that, it's going to be really easy. We just go in, down along that rhizome, counting the pseudobulbs as we go. So we'll just count the bigger ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, and there we see 5 there is where this splits up. So we could either take one large cutting there, or we can just remove that single, if you want to call it branch or part of the rhizome at that point. And what we want to do is we want to cut it right down here at the base. So always remember with the sanitized equipment to just get in there, a nice sharp single cut to give you a nice little piece. We'll just clean this up and then we'll be ready to repot or to mount. There we can see it was a nice clean cut right at the base, and it's helped neaten up the plant. I'll also take this piece out here just to tidy up the plant. So that it gets more of a well-rounded appearance. And there we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 pseudobulbs. So the difference between sympodial orchids and monopodial orchids is that sympodial orchids pretty much grow horizontally and they have multiple different points from which they grow. So they almost form this mat of spreading arms, if you want to put it that way. The rhizomes will branch out in multiple different directions, having more than one single lead, as what often happens with the monopodial that just have generally that one tall, long lead growing vertically. And these maxillarias or the coconut orchid are just such wonderful gifts. Everyone appreciates one of these. That coconut perfume is just actually quite amazing. Another incredibly easy one to do divisions from are oncidiums, because also the rhizome is almost running in a way and it has all these pseudobulbs that are pushed up almost equidistant apart along it. So especially when a piece is running out the side like this, it's easy to go in and cut it off wherever you want along the length, as long as you're leaving at least 3 or 4 back bulbs. And they root so readily along the length of their rhizome that it makes them easy to propagate from. And these divisions are relatively hardy and take quite easily. So here with this part of the plant, we can cut it back all the way to the original pseudobulb. So this whole piece of rhizome has come off separately. So on our sanitized secateurs, just go in there, just cutting off our section. And here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pseudobulbs with a new one starting. If we're going to be mounting this to a tree, I would leave all of these back bulbs on. But if I'm planting it into a pot, what I would generally do is I would go in and snip it back there, because new roots aren't going to form from this old part. The old rhizome and pseudobulbs are not going to produce new roots. The new roots are only going to be formed from the new growth. And in a pot, I don't want parts of the plant that are going to rot. If I mount this, all this extra energy is going to be needed to help this plant to stabilize itself onto the tree and give it a good start. Cattleyas, Lalias and their kin all pretty much have the same sort of way that you'll be dealing with them. We're going to be cutting along this horizontal rhizome. Generally, you want to cut a piece that is as horizontal as possible. If it's got a kink in it, it makes it difficult to repot. So we generally want to cut it off in sections that allow you to set it into your pot with the rhizome horizontal to the surface of the media. And with these, we're wanting at least 3 back bulbs. But here with this section, I'm lucky enough, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pseudobulbs that I can use. But looking in, it's going to be difficult to get my secateurs all the way in to the very beginning of the rhizome where that 7th pseudobulb comes from. So I'll go into just in front of it. So I'm only taking the 6 off. Go. And we want to cut off right in front of that pseudobulb. Removing that whole piece of rhizome off. The reason that we're cutting right in front of the pseudobulb is because we don't want to have a piece of rhizome in front of the pseudobulb that can then rot or get infected and then allow that infection to run back and up into the pseudobulb itself. It just makes it easier so that we can just treat that end and it's safe from any infections further. Also, by cutting off at that point, it's almost forcing those auxins that are available in the plant to push out those new lateral buds that are dormant in and around the base of each of these pseudobulbs. And now looking at tight little orchids such as these that are all tightly bundled up together, and you want to do divisions out of it. Often the easiest way to do it is to feel your orchid, to feel where the rhizomes start and where they stop, and just try and follow it back. You'll just have to slowly wedge parts of your plant apart so that you can see what you have available and what you're working with. Also, again, you want to ensure that you're getting enough of these back bulbs. So again, minimum always is 3. If you're running with less than 3, that's when you start having problems. You're having to look after your orchid extremely carefully to ensure that there's enough energy left in the plant so that it can produce those new growths and new roots. The more pseudobulb volume you take with your division, the less setback your plant is going to be and the less transplant shock it goes under. Often when dealing with Cattleyas, if you're taking 4 to 5 back bulbs or pseudobulbs with your cutting, often it can still continue to flower in that same following season. So remember, try and always take as big a division as possible, or as big a division as your friend will allow you. So this would just be a matter of carefully going in there, opening it up, see where it's all attached, and then you'd probably need the sharp nose secateurs to get in there just to do your little snip right at the base of those pseudobulbs. And once we've got to all of those, we get to our dendrobiums. Whether they're the hard cane dendrobiums or the noble type, most of them I don't like to divide the plant itself. I prefer to keep the plant as a solid plant because invariably they'll produce enough kikis to be able to do our divisions from, because dendrobiums don't particularly like their bases disturbed. They don't like those basal roots being disturbed too much. It does set them back a lot and it takes them a long time to recover. What you'll often find is that the parts of the plant that you've divided off will generally die from the base up your canes, and you'll only have the kikis left that are produced then on those canes. You can still get your divisions to work with dendrobiums, but it's a lot more difficult And when you're producing this many kikis, why are you going to go to the effort? So always remember, when visiting your friend's house, take your own secateurs and sanitizer so you can take your own cutting. You know enough now not to be afraid to help your friends share. Sharing is caring after all. And talking about sharing, Ed's shared a lot of reference material in that Buy Me a Coffee link down below, so don't be afraid to go have a look down there. And thank you for watching. If you found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button down below, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.